Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Philanthropy New York's webinar, Can Capacity Building Impact Be Quantitatively Assessed? Lessons from an Emerging Evaluation Method. I want to thank Wings, our co-sponsor today, and also our presenters, Barry Knight, Anna Pino, and Anna Pond. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Anna Pond.
Good morning, everybody. I am just going to spend a few minutes because we have a nice packed room for this program. We have more than 70 participants in this webinar that have registered. So I'm going to move quickly through the intro. I just wanted to take a minute to explain how this program came to Philanthropy New York. I do some consulting work with Philanthropy New York to develop programs here. And I also do other consulting work in philanthropy and with nonprofits. I have done some work with Wings, with the co-sponsor today, and Anna Pino of Wings is one of the presenters today. And I've done some work with them editing particular publications that they've worked on around the value, capacity, and impact of the philanthropy infrastructure internationally. I've also done some work with Grantcraft on looking at capacity building. There's a guide that just came out from Grantcraft on capacity building. And one of the major areas of focus there was on assessment of capacity building. So as I was, over the last couple of years, as I was working with Wings, I obviously read their materials in detail as an editor and realized that some of the work that they're doing in the development of what you'll hear about as the 4 C's that is being used to assess the value of philanthropy's infrastructure also has implications and might be useful in an assessment of capacity building context. They've been working on some quantitative methods around assessment, and so we thought, since we know that a number of Philanthropy New York's members are working on capacity building, grant making, and other types of resourcing, we thought this would be a useful conversation. And lo and behold, more than 70 people are registered for this program. So it tells us, yes, this conversation is primed. So I really want to turn it over quickly to the speakers. Our first speaker today, I'd like to introduce Anna Pino. She is the Knowledge Management Coordinator at Wings, the Worldwide Initiatives for Grantmaker Support. And Anna's going to tell you a little bit about what Wings is and how this model emerged and its implications. So over to you, Anna.
Oh, thanks, Anna. And by the way, that was a great pronunciation of my surname.
Oh, good.
Yes. I'd like to thank Philanthropy New York for the opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us. It was great to be here. And I'll start quickly talking about Wings. We are an association of almost 90 associations and support organizations around the world. We're kind of the umbrella of the umbrella organizations. We're in over 30 countries right now in every region of the world. And our focus on strengthening philanthropy through knowledge and information exchange, and also bringing together different actors in the field. And we're constantly looking for new ways to help philanthropy develop and grow. And of course, the best way to help is to hear what people need and what they find important in their work. So last year, we ran a survey with our members and partners, and not surprisingly, impact assessment and evaluation came up as a top trend in philanthropy. And also, on our first ever report on philanthropy infrastructure launched last year, impact assessment came up as one of the key gaps to be addressed by the organizations. So, with diminishing resources around the world, and infrastructure organizations, as other organizations in the philanthropic field, face the challenge and the pressure to demonstrate results and to communicate their value. So how does infrastructure organizations help foundations fulfill their mission? How do they affect practices, legislation, funding, and other aspects of the enabling environment for philanthropy? And the problem is that this falls out of the service provisions logic. It's not as tangible as building houses or hospitals or schools, and as you may know, it's not something you can actually count. And this is where philanthropy infrastructure meets capacity building in a way that it can be a huge challenge to measure their impact. But, of course, where there is a will, there's a way. And two things that help measuring impact are, of course, good data and storytelling. And for instance, using data we have collected for over a decade now on community philanthropy, we could find a correlation between the presence of community philanthropy support organizations in a country with the growth of community foundations in the same country. So you can see here that between 2010 and 2013, countries with support organizations had 9 times more community foundations than in other countries. And using this kind of information and different stories is very helpful. But what we really need are ways to assess impact systematically and in a way that is comparable across organizations. And that's where we think a framework based on the 4 C's can help. The 4 C's are based on the benefits of philanthropy infrastructure organizations, and Barry will talk in a moment about how they came about through some dark magic, how he likes to call it statistics, but he'll come back to that soon. And I'll give just a brief overview of what the 4 C's are. So the first one is connection, because these organizations, they build relationships between other organizations. So the focus here on networking, peer learning, sharing, and by bringing foundations together, these infrastructure organizations, they create a virtuous circle and of peer learning and sharing of knowledge and information and other aspects of philanthropy. And the second C of our list is capability. And these organizations help foundations build skills, knowledge, and expertise. So this is more focused on one-to-one advice and providing online resources, seminars, webinars, convenings, conferences, and so on. And the 4th C is capacity. So they also build resources, and that was a very interesting finding because they're not just focused on financial resources, but they include them because they provide training on fundraising, for instance, or information on fund sources, or provide references and other linkages to sources of money and other kinds of resources. And finally, the last one is credentials. So they help build a reputation, recognition, and influence for the philanthropic field in general. So they kind of act on behalf of philanthropy as a field. And so that entails building, for instance, recognition and trust with governments and the wider society in general. And we started testing this in practice and with our report on community philanthropy infrastructure. And it was great that the case studies we found for the report match the 4 C's framework. So that was a very good start. Here we have the example of the Association of Community Relations, ARC, in Romania. And we see that it applies, and their activities link very well to the 4 C's. So the connection that they built, a cooperation framework, and capability, because they shared learning between community foundations in the field, and capacity that they actually supported some initial operational costs for foundations to start, and credentials that through this work they built a reputation that attracted support from private foundations and corporate foundations as well. So they attracted others by building this kind of reputation that community philanthropy was a field that was growing and developing. So that's our starting point for the framework, and we might go back to that, but I think it's important now to go to Barry so that he can explain how we came to the 4 C's and explain some of the numbers side of it.
So I want to turn it over. Thank you, Anna. So Barry, I just want to introduce you briefly. Barry Knight is the Executive Director of Centris in the UK and an advisor of the Global Fund for Community Foundations in areas particularly for evaluation and knowledge management. He is a social scientist, but we like to call him the wizard of quantitative analysis for those of us that aren't as versed in these aspects. So Barry, tell us about what is the quantitative aspect and analysis with the 4 C's that you've undertaken.
Okay. This all sounds very professional. Welcome, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here, and I prefer to be called a wizard rather than master of the dark arts, which is what Anna Pino called me a little while ago. I'd like to go back about 15 years, which is to the origins of Wings and the importance of building infrastructure and building the capacity of civil society, philanthropy, the voluntary sector, the non-profit organizations, community organizations. And that's, in a sense, very central to the way we work as a sector, to build power, influence, knowledge, learning among a range of organizations. And part of the difficulty with that is that work is almost entirely invisible. You don't see it, whereas economic developers, you think you can see railways, you can see telegraph poles, you can see fiber optics, you can see the kind of building blocks of economic development. But the building blocks of social development, I mean things like information, advice, mentoring, are very much harder, convening, are very much harder to really to touch and feel. And it follows from that, because you can't see them, it's very difficult to measure them. And because you can't measure them, you can't actually demonstrate that actually you've done anything to actually enhance the organizations or the fields that you've actually targeted for that particular capacity building. And that's a particular problem for an organization like Wings that sets its stall through actually building the capacity of the field, both itself at building the capacity of its members, but also its members themselves are involved in building the capacity of the field. So the net result of that is that there are very few funders who will support capacity building or the development of infrastructure. And it's a kind of negative spiral. So one of the things that Wings did, and I was very keen on this and actually pressed for it, was to say, can we begin to measure these items that we're talking about? So it's visible for people to see, and we can have publicly accountable kind of systems to begin to measure these things. And sometimes I think it's important not to wish for what you get. And the next stage of this journey takes me to Dubai, where I spent an overnight in a coffee bar thinking about these issues. And Anna and I had embarked on various kinds of surveys with Wings members. And we'd also done a consumer survey about what do people think about the infrastructure that they actually get. So that we got qualitative responses to questions about how do you see capacity building from the receiving end? What is it doing for you, and what's its value? And we got a lot of information back, and I spent these 12 hours at Dubai airport, fortified by coffee, reading all of this stuff and thinking, oh my goodness, this is really, really very difficult to take, because it was context specific, it contained a lot of detail. And slowly, though, throughout the night, I began to see various kinds of patterns. I mean, there was a thing clearly about resources. There was clearly something about skill development. There was clearly something about networking, and there was clearly something about legitimacy. And that these, when I looked at the responses, I began to be able to classify them into types. That either they were building the kind of the finance base or the resource base of an organization, or they were building the skills, knowledge, and experience of the people running the organization, or they were building the connections between organizations, or they were building the influence of the field on authorities and regulatory authorities and stuff like that. So words started popping into my mind, and the first one that popped into my mind was actually capability, for which is code for sort of things like training and mentoring and advising. It's about giving people enhanced skills and knowledge. So I called that capability. And then I thought, well, what's a word like that might begin with C? And I came up with capacity for the sort of resources and finances. There's nothing set in stone with these, but they did seem to fit. And then I thought, connections for networks, for convening power, for bringing people together, for forming partnerships, for building collective impact, those kinds of things. And then there's something else. There's something about the way that the sector is viewed by people who are not in the sector. And actually, I've been reading an article this morning about how in 90 countries of the world, the space for civil society has actually been diminished over the past few years. The source of that is ICNL. So that how do authorities and so on regard this? And I could not think of a category for this, and certainly one that began with C. And then suddenly it dawned on me that the word was credit. And so I started writing about the 4 C's, and the first draft of that was credit. People pointed out to me that the word credit was actually ambiguous, because it actually means debt as well as credential. So we actually changed it to credential. So I've got these 4 categories, and we wrote about them in the report and put them out there and launched them. And we launched them last year at a meeting in Istanbul with Wings members, and they seemed to like it. But the problem with this is that it doesn't have any validation. And as a statistician, I like to not just make up my own categories, but to see whether those categories work. So Anna and I did a survey, and we asked people to say, this was a particular survey of support organizations for community foundations. And we asked them systematically about a number of questions, whether they strengthen the civil society, whether they encourage foundations to engage with other community foundations, whether they strengthen the local culture of giving, provided technical assistance, help to increase funding, develop community leadership, improve the legal and fiscal environment, and about 5 or 6 other categories. And we asked people to say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how important are those items in your list of priorities? And so we actually tabulated that, and the most important characteristic, with a mean score of 3.24 on a 4-point scale, 5-point scale, with 0 being the bottom of the scale, was strengthening civil society. Helping them to gain volunteers was the lowest, with 1.93. Roughly in the middle was improving the legal and fiscal environment at 2.90. And we were able to look at that distribution and begin to say, well, these are the kind of priorities that community foundation support organizations are giving. But that doesn't answer how do we get that from there to the 4 C's. Well, we get there from there to the 4 C's with a process called factor analysis, which is now on your screen. And we analyze the priorities of the community philanthropy infrastructure organizations. And this process of factor analysis, it looks at correlated data which are there are underlying relationships, and boils them down to their simplest structure. It looks for the underlying factors that are driving the field. So if you look at the diagram that's should be on your screen now, just look at the blue lines. At the top, you've got 0.92 helping them to increase funding. The next blue line down is 0.79, encouraging philanthropic gifts to community foundations. The next blue one is strengthening the local culture of giving. Well, that looks very much like resource development to me, and we called that capacity on our scale. So that those three items together, join together in terms of capacity. Resource capacity. If you look at for example, I won't go through all of them, you can look at these later. If you look at the credit line, which is the blue line, the dark blue line, there are two items there: improving the legal and fiscal environment and encouraging authorities to be more responsive. And they are the ones which are about credit. Remember, we have changed that to credential, but that's where the external legitimacy of the field. So that what we found through this process of correlating correlations and seeing what went together and what was separated were indeed, in the priorities of these organizations, there were four categories. There was connection, there was capacity, there was capability, and there was credential. That gave us empirical validation for my rather diseased thoughts when I was at Dubai airport. This sort of gave me kind of heart. You probably across the other side of the Atlantic, you heard many yippies. Yippee! There was something here that really enabled me to think maybe I'm onto something. And when this report was again presented at a conference, I think in Cleveland in October, again, people kind of like this. Now, this is not, I'm not dealing in a perfect world. I'm dealing in heuristic devices that enable people to advance their work. There's nothing magical. There's certainly no dark arts here. It's all a sense of do these categories make sense to you? And in terms of building capacity, they seem to. And Anna and I are going to go on and work with a number of organizations, which she can talk about in a bit, to actually test this out further. We're at the stage of hypotheses so this is kind of working out. But this does give us a method. And so here's a method. The next slide, which I'll try and get up here.
Barry, can I jump in for one quick second? Because we're trying not to take questions as we go just because we have so many people, but there is a clarifying question that I think is important to address. Okay. So someone has come in and asked, what does infrastructure mean in the context of capacity building? And basically, if I want to put in money for a budget for that, what are we talking about? I want to take a stab at that really quickly.
Okay.
To say in infrastructure here, we are in fact talking about the organizations within philanthropy that represent the philanthropic infrastructure. So those are the associations of funders and such internationally. So when we're talking about infrastructure here, we're talking about the infrastructure support organizations to philanthropy, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, and then
yes,
but
that's
the
right.
other yes, and so the other part of the question is a much deeper question, because capacity building, as we know, is funded by every foundation. There's no science to how foundations approach it. I mean, oftentimes the needs and what is paid for is defined through an assessment process that a grantee undertakes or through the proposal development, and it can be to fund anything from general operating support to specific line items. But that's another conversation. But when we're talking about infrastructure here, what we mean are the infrastructure support organizations in philanthropy. And what we're doing is saying, hey, the capacity building assessment we're using for them has a broader application to capacity building in general. Right,
Sure.
Barry? Okay.
Yeah. All I'm trying to do is to give some frameworks that might be helpful to aid people's thinking.
Thank you.
And to try to make it a little bit more scientific than it is at the moment, to try to, to think about some categories. And certainly I would hope that we would want to work with the field on an iterative process so that as we have been doing so far, because WINGS is a very participative organization. And, one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar is because we want to learn from you and test out our ideas, which are very provisional. So that we'll be using the feedback from this webinar into our own work. And this is, a create and adjust process. But where these 4 C's get us is a way of thinking about performance measures for each of the 4 C's: resource development through capacity, relationship development through connections, and so on. And we can begin to develop performance measures for each of those big C's. And now we think about those C's as headings, big headings, rather than prescriptive items that you then have to follow. Because the capacity building, as I said, for a women's group in Nepal will probably be very different from a community foundation in Cleveland. It depends entirely on the context, and it depends what kind of changes you want to see are. And this needs some testing out. But those changes, and this is always the difficult bit, are qualities. We want to see changes in people's ability to be able to do things, or to raise resources, or to build better relationships with their peers. And these things are always qualitative measures, and this one is really is often the sticking point. And what I've really spent most of my life thinking about is how do we turn qualities into quantities using Likert scales. How we can actually think about the kinds of categories that move people from one place to another. And the obvious, the simplest kind of Likert scale is: do you make a statement? Do you enjoy pasta very much, a lot, quite a bit, a little, not very much? Those kinds of those kinds of qualities of assessing pasta that can be turned into numerical scores, and you can begin to compare progress from a particular baseline. So that in the community foundation example I gave you, we used things like persuading the government or local authorities to invest in local community philanthropy, supporting community activism, encouraging authorities to be more responsive, helping them to gain volunteers. And we've used numerical scores to actually assess those things. And we haven't done it themselves. We've asked people in communities to do that and to argue about those scores and begin to kind of get some kind of norm for those kinds of scores. So that what you can then do is to compare progress from a baseline. And the baseline, at its simplest, you can plot in a spider chart. But here's an example there, where I've got a 0 to 5 scale there. You can see capacity at the top, capability on the right-hand side, connections at the bottom. The CR has been missed off credentials. But you can see that capability is quite high, but credentials are very low, and connections and capacity are quite moderate. That's where you start, and then the next stage is you follow up a bit later, and the spider chart has filled out, and you can begin to get quantitative measures of those kinds of things. So what we've done is to begin to look at, get underneath the data that we've got to try to understand the simplest possible trends and to begin to develop means of actually measuring it. And our next stage in our work is to select, and we're going to do this with selected organizations in Spain in July this year, to begin this process, to help people work through their own stories, because as Anna pointed out, it's not just statistics, it's story too. But we do want to try to get some common measures of these performance measures for the field. Now, it's not for us, as it were, professional workers who are supporting the field to determine what those performance measures are. The field themselves need to work them out, and we will actually help them to actually track them so that they can make sense both qualitatively through their stories, but also quantitatively through their numbers. And there are some advanced statistical techniques which enable you to track this. So there is a major US funder I'm working with at the moment. We have been tracking their 200 plus grantees in one of their programs for 4 years now, using the same measures and tracking the developments of the field using advanced statistical techniques, a general linear model technique, and it's called analysis of variance with replicate measures. So we can begin to drive some science into this field, but also not to lose its creativity and not to lose its storytelling ability. I want to be very careful in not overclaiming here. We're at the very early stages of this work. I do remember and honor my confusion at Dubai Airport when I was trying to make sense of what I saw as a morass of data. But we are sort of trying to go one step forward and avoid 2 steps back. So, but this meeting is a valuable step on the process, and I wish I could see your faces so we could actually talk about this rather than just interact in this kind of way. But that's all I've got to say just now. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Barry. You realize it's hard not to think of you as a master of dark arts when you have things like spiders in your charts, right?
Well, no, you don't know. They could be tarantulas.
I know. I just had to say that. So everyone who is on the line, I'm going to pose 2 questions to the moderators. If you have questions, start putting them in through the chat, because we're going to have an open question period where we're going to try to get to some of your questions. We've been chatting here at Philanthropy New York. I'm sitting here with Philanthropy New York, and we also are interested if you'd like to have a follow-up discussion maybe in the fall around this. So if you have questions that are in your mind, you can feel free to start chatting, throwing them in the chat lineup. But I have 2 questions for our 2 speakers today. And the first is really about what if funders on this call or funders who are interested in this work wanted to join in and learn more about what you're doing with Wings and your methodology around this, how would they get involved? What would that look like? So maybe that's a question for you, Anna.
Yes, sure. And it would be great if people want to join, because as Barry said, in Wings we really emphasize participation, and we want everything we do to be part of a participatory process. We even have kind of 4 rules for the development of the indicators that we're provisionally calling ours. That's O for ownership, that we want the field to own the indicators, and U for usefulness, that it needs to be considered a useful tool, and R for robustness, that it should have a properly researched baseline, and there goes Barry's statistics and spiders or tarantulas. And as for simplicity, that organization staff should be able to apply them to their day-to-day work. We don't want for it to be something too hard or difficult that people think they can't use in the future. So following these rules, we're building this process, and we plan to have in 2015 and 2016 between 2 and 4 face-to-face meetings The first one is in July in Spain. And depending on the interest, we can change location. The first one now is in Europe, but we normally try to have meetings in different regions at Wings, so people from different regions can participate. And we also have follow-up discussions online with webinars, and this is why this is very important for us. And this is kicking off the process, basically. And we will have a core group of organizations, probably that will be kind of our champions and test the indicators. And participation from, if any organization wants to be a core organization, they should just contact us and be part of the whole process. But of course, if you can't be part of a 2-year process and you can attend one meeting or one webinar, and the help is very welcome. So we'll create a page on our website posting every single development of the 4 Cs and where we are, so that if you are in this webinar right now and a year from now you want to help and you're able to help, or you want to know where we are, and you can see what the process was and where we are, and find a way to help or contact us and ask what you can do. So basically, it's a long-term process. Excuse me?
No, sorry. Keep going, sorry.
Okay, it's a long-term process, and people can jump in when they feel it's the right time for them, or when we're at the point where they think they can help, or that the framework can help them, but also they can be part of the process as a whole.
So it sounds like if there are funders on this call that are interested in the actual assessment and participating in it, particularly if they fund infrastructure within philanthropy, they can contact Philanthropy New York. We can hook you up with Wings. You can reach out to Wings directly, and it sounds like you'll be publishing on your website the development of this initiative so people can join at different phases. Is that right?
Yes, exactly, because I think that's it's a good way to get people to participate in the process. And the ultimate goal is to create a self-assessment tool that organizations can use.
Absolutely. Now, as we said, this tool is right now being developed for those infrastructure support organizations within philanthropy. But my question, I guess this is to you, Barry, how could this model be applied to foundations interested in assessing their particular capacity building portfolios?
Well, I think it's a general framework, and it doesn't, as I say, it isn't prescriptive. And I think that having worked with foundations for sort of better part of 30 years on evaluation, the big enemy is complexity and trying to do everything, and really figuring out the things that really matter to you. Now, this framework, I mean, is as I say, it's a learning device. It enables people to do what they want to do, and there is a kind of quasi-scientific methodology behind it, but it's essentially an adaptable one. So it can, be adapted to any kind of capacity building activity. But you need to put the specific context in there, because the context will always be specific. And the difficulty with a tool is that often it will work for one thing, but it won't work for another. And I think that my key word here is be promiscuous with it. Just use it. Take the framework and adapt it to your particular situation and adapt it to other situations. The whole point of the hours acronym is make it yours, make it ours. The big problem with evaluation consultants is they often come with fixed ideas about how you should do things. Well, actually, I think that's the wrong way around. I think that you need to fit the evaluation to your needs, hence the hours acronym. Because often things go sour because people actually reverse the letters of the word. S-O. Yeah. It's an anagram of sour, and people get that the wrong way round. So take the tool, be creative with it, get it to work for you, keep it simple, keep it on one page on a spreadsheet, and don't make it complicated.
Right. So Barry and Anna, I want to go to our participants at this point. We'll do the live poll in a second, but there's some questions that have come in that I'd love to address, and then we can go to the live poll. Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay. So one question is a technical question for you, Barry. Were the items on the previous slide the measures that they ask of all grantees to score on a scale of 1 to 5? Is that how you assign the quantitative measures?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's just a technical question, so yes. And then the next question I'm going to take a quick stab at, but then I want to turn it over to you, Barry and Anna. So it's a comment. It says, this may be helpful in measuring growth of a particular organization. If we are interested in building capacity and activity of a broader field or even a movement, how do you see this transferable beyond looking at growth of a specific organization, e.g. to assess impact capacity of generating greater capacity beyond an organization? So, I mean, I think actually this model, what I like about it, and I'm meeting with the foundation later on today, and I'm realizing we're talking about the 4 Cs when we're talking about their capacity building work, is that it is good for looking at a portfolio of grantees or a field of grantees, because it is about not just one organization. It could be applied more broadly, correct? Barry, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the unit of analysis, again, is something that you can adapt according to circumstances. I mean, it's particularly suitable for, and I have used it with foundations, for their programs. Because their programs are made up generally of, not always, but usually, of constituent grantees. So you can assess the performance of your grantees using common criteria that you have determined. And what I always do with that is if I'm asking constituent parts of a program to have a not applicable category in the questions. So if it doesn't apply to them, they can just simply hit not applicable. And that means that you're not giving a one-size-fits-all to your whole grants portfolio, but you are getting sufficient of the commonality of the measures you're using across the piece. And that enables you to look at the variance between different grantees, different types of grantees, but also, much more importantly, to look at the whole program, because the whole program is really what you're interested in. My experience of grant makers, having worked with Ford and Mott and others, is that what really counts is the impact of the portfolio rather than the impact of the single grantee.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what's really exciting about this is it does look at a portfolio analysis. And before this call, you and I kind of sidebarred, Barry, on the fact that sometimes the terminology theory of change makes people kind of shudder, including me, because it can become a rabbit hole for a lot of conceptual analysis. But if you think about these 4C categories and look at your portfolio and really walk through what are you trying to achieve related to connections, credentials, capabilities, capacity for your portfolio, identify as you said, the kind of the qualities or those indicators that you want to see change over time, and then you're really assessing toward those. That's how this framework could be applied more broadly, correct?
Yeah, that's precisely the way we've conceived it, yeah.
Exactly. So the idea is that these are the 4 categories that have to do with capacity building of infrastructure organizations. They apply to pretty much any organizations and to a portfolio of organizations. And you're in the process of testing that. So if there are did we have any other questions that came in? I think that's it. We're going to do a quick live poll, and then we'll do a wrap and see what's next. Okay, so the live poll. Are we ready? Okay. So there's a question that should appear to all participants. Can you see this type of assessment being relevant in your context? Yes, no, or maybe. You could take a minute to respond.
It's like watching the Eurovision Song Contest come in.
Exactly.
Don't be afraid to say no. It's always helpful.
Yeah, you can say what. Yeah, exactly. This is very helpful for Wings. It's helpful for us, for Philanthropy New York, for you to respond. So if you could take a minute, that would be great.
Exactly, because even though Wings focus, of course, philanthropy infrastructure, and our members are associations, their members are foundations, and we want to help our members help foundations and develop this kind of frameworks. So this kind of feedback is very important for us.
Mm-hmm. So the poll results are coming in. We've got so far 8 people who say yes, 1 with a no, and 9 with a maybe. If you responded yes, if you wouldn't mind chatting and giving us how you see it applicable, that would be so useful to see. Or even a maybe. I mean, frankly, I'd love to see I'd love to hear more about where you don't see the application too. So feel free to chat with us and say why you said yes, no, or maybe. This is where I wish we could talk instead of be.
Yeah, this is a little impersonal, isn't it? Doesn't
Yes.
make it ours.
Exactly. So if you'd like to just share your thoughts on where you see it as applicable, or maybe or yes. If you felt it's not applicable, why not? That would be really useful to hear. We'll give you a minute. All right, so you can chat something if you'd like to. You don't have to. Any other final questions from the audience that you just have? As we said, the ways to connect to this conversation. Aha. Okay, so we have one respondent talking about how, hang on one second, somebody's enlarging it for my eyes. 1 second. So someone who expresses some concern about the quantitative overwhelming the texture of the work, numbers come to have meaning beyond perhaps what they should.
Do you want me to respond to that, Anna?
I would love that. I would love you to respond to that, Barry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a fair concern, and I'm one that I'm very conscious of. And, I mean, statisticians tend to be blinkered in the way they think about the world because they tend to be very good at numbers, and they then make the mistake that the only things that matter are numbers, and that's wholly false. I think that, that any statistician knows that you can make numbers up that give you a kind of false sense of accuracy. And there's a technical term called that, which is spurious accuracy, that we look at numbers and we think, oh, they must be true because they're numbers. And I think that we need and will be very conscious of the need to, as we are translating quality into quantity, that we don't lose anything in that translation, and it's very difficult to not to do that, as the questioner points out. But I think, in a sense, that makes it even more important to, alongside numbers, to give illustrative examples and illustrative counterexamples, so that if there seems to be, 9 out of 10 say this, well, the 9 is composed of these kinds of things, and the 1 is composed of that, so that all thinking is balanced between qualitative, and that's sort of words and pictures, as well as numbers, which is the kind of we're trying to add to the vocabulary rather than take away from the vocabulary, and I am very conscious of that. The other thing I think about statistics, and not a lot of statisticians say this, but I think it's true, is that the point of numbers is to start conversations, not to end them. That when one presents numerical results, these are always the start of the conversation. Can we use this to examine what is underneath? And that in a way, if you get, if you're a foundation and you get results back from your field, you need to deconstruct the numbers to find out what they are really telling you, because they may not be telling you quite what you think about it on the surface. So that's a very good and very important bit of wisdom coming across from that questioner. Absolutely. So numbers without context, numbers without kind of deconstructing
how they were derived and what's behind them is not. You're absolutely right. That's not the definitive. The number's not the definitive. It's an aspect.
No. It's very hard to get meaning out of numbers. Numbers can strip meaning. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have another comment from someone who says their foundation represents mostly private foundations, and they can see 3 of the 4 C's as applicable. That they're not typically supporting members with the capacity element, but focus more on connection, capability, and credentials. And so the comment here is, it would be useful for Wings to separate analysis between associations representing community foundations and those representing mostly private funders. You've done some of that, haven't you? Separating the analysis.
Yes, we have. Yeah, we have done that. But I mean, there's another point to make, which is that these items are interrelated by building people's connections, by building their capabilities, by building their credentials. You're very likely to have an impact on the resource base. So, and if you look at the data, these items are not separate streams. They're actually interconnected streams. Otherwise, the factor analysis wouldn't work. But they are also, we're talking about dominance. We're talking about the description of what happens. So this is a relative rather than an absolute kind of set of distinctions.
And yes, and I'd just like to make a point that we were testing this with organizations that support only community philanthropy, but other organizations also support private foundations and corporate foundations as well. And when we did that, we did with associations in Romania, France, Germany, Russia, and South Africa, and Canada. And a couple of them wouldn't fill in all the 4 C's, but as Barry mentioned, it was about the dominance and where they would fit kind of most.
Yeah, and I would encourage you to look at your most recent report that you included had some case studies that actually looks at data across the 4 C's. The newest infrastructure report that you did, perhaps we can send that out to the participants of this call. Would that be useful? What do you think, Anna?
We could definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a good idea, yeah.
Because you could see this in action with kind of how the qualitative matches the quantitative a little. So one last question, and then I think we should probably wrap because it's 7 minutes till. This is a comment. We don't currently, this is from somebody who says their foundation doesn't currently provide capacity building components in its programmatic grants, but they're considering what that would look like. And they said the indicators provided can be helpful here. So this was a useful framework. Also, as we think about how to measure our impact on a field, they feel that this could be useful. And this is mainly a comment saying we often struggle with how to quantify qualitative data. And while we recognize the importance of qualitative data, you can't forget the quantitative. So thank you for sharing that comment. I think, Barry, you basically addressed this with your earlier comment on not overstating or over representing or giving too much credence to the quantitative, but at the same time having an element of quantitative that is part of the story of what's happening with the grantees, right?
Yes, I did. And there are ways of, I haven't gone into them here, but there are ways of doing very detailed qualitative research that give you very precise findings if you want to do that. The computer program called NVivo, N-V-I-V-O, enables you to do that. But, I mean, 2 things about it. One is it's not easy to use. And secondly, people need to consider whether it's worth actually spending that amount of time on stuff. Because I think in my experience of advising foundations is the important things are achieving what they're there to do, and evaluation technologies should support that rather than spend all your money on large scale. I'm saying this against my nature as an evaluation consultant, but you shouldn't be spending a lot of money on evaluation consultants. You should be streamlining the stuff into your systems and getting what you really want. because I think that, as the evaluation industry, as it exists in Europe anyway, has not always been helpful to the foundation sector. It tends to sort of stand apart and not really understand what they're doing. And this method says you've really got to understand what you want to achieve and actually go for it, and you can measure it yourself. Because keep it simple, though.
Yes. So I think we want to wrap up the call. Some takeaways for me, and then Barry, I'd like to go to you, and Anna, you as well. Just any last thoughts, and then we'll close. And then Philanthropy New York, if you have anything to add. It strikes me that, again, back to the original why this call happened, is that I'm with you, Barry, that, I'm in the business of consulting, and I think oftentimes foundations lean a little bit too much on the consultants, not just evaluators, not just statisticians, but oftentimes the work could be done internally and should be embedded within their own work more. And consultants that can help folks do that are really what foundations need. And so the idea of this methodology is to say, take this framework, run with it, see how it plays out in your context and with your grantees. And also, if you want to join in a community that's going to be really, really testing this methodology, you're welcome to, and you can join in with Wings and Barry in this journey. So I just want to say thank you for participating, everybody, but I want to turn it to Barry and Anna to say a couple last thoughts, and then to Philanthropy New York, and we'll be done. So Barry?
Well, yeah, welcome participation, but just beware that if you check in with us, remember it's the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave.
I see. So Anna?
That's it.
Definitely.
Okay.
So thank you very much, everyone.
Yes.
And again, we welcome any sort of input, and please do contact us directly or through Philanthropy New York if you have any questions or any ideas on how this could be helpful. And if you couldn't think of anything during the webinar about the poll and how you think it could be helpful, maybe or not, just please do drop us an email or a message. We'd love that.
Yeah, thank you so much to the person who made the comment that just came in, where they talk about they see the utility of a measurement tool as a model that helps turn hypothesis into measurable impact indicators. Thank you so much for that. We hope that this gives you something to chew on along those lines. We will also follow up to see if people want to continue this conversation later on. Philanthropy New York, any final words?
Thank you to all the speakers today, Anna Pon, Anna Pina, and Barry Knight, and thank you very much for your time, everyone. And we'll be following up with you.
Okay, cheers. Have a great day.